History is usually written in these grand monuments, in solemn ceremonies, and in the enduring legacy of heroes. But every now and then, history takes a completely bizarre, almost unbelievable detour. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unraveling one of the absolute most audacious and, frankly, theatrical hoaxes in British history. We're talking about a story that gripped a mourning nation, manipulated the absolute highest levels of government, and really proved just how easily human desperation can be weaponized. Let's dive in. So, the big question right up front, and it honestly sounds like the plot of a cheap mystery novel, is how did a legendary figure, a man presumed dead at the bottom of the ocean, suddenly make an impossible return a full 10 years later, only for the truth to be snatched away in the blink of an eye? Well, to understand how an entire country was so easily fooled, we first have to understand the massive, almost mythic shadow cast by the man they lost. All right, part one, the missing national hero. To really get the gravity of this hoax, we need to travel back to the height of the First World War. Take a look at this guy. This is Lord Kitchener. Now, if you were alive in Britain in the early 20th century, his face was literally everywhere. He was the ultimate symbol of British military might. You've probably seen those famous recruitment posters with him pointing, right? Urging the men of the nation to do their duty. He wasn't just a general, he was an absolute icon, a rock-solid stabilizing force when the whole globe was in chaos. So the idea of losing him, it was just completely unthinkable to the British public.
Yet the unthinkable actually happened. On June 5th, 1916, Kitchener was aboard the HMS Hampshire, heading out on a diplomatic mission to Russia, and right off the treacherous coast of the Orkney Islands, the ship struck a German mine and went down in a massive, violent storm. Out of a crew of over 700 men, only a tiny handful survived. Lord Kitchener perished. But here is the absolute critical detail for our story. His body was never recovered. The sea just swallowed their hero whole. Which brings us to part two, a miraculous 1926 discovery. For a decade, that total lack of a body just haunted the British public. Without a grave, rumors spread like wildfire. People were whispering that he'd been captured, that he was living in secret, that he escaped on a life raft. I mean, even in February of 1926, a full 10 years later, the British Parliament was still actively debating rumors that Kitchener might be alive. The grief was just that raw. And then, in August 1926, a journalist named Frank Power drops an absolute bombshell. He claims he traveled to a remote, old grave on the coast of Norway, and, against all odds, he has found the body of Lord Kitchener. The media, as you might expect, just completely erupted. Look at this actual headline from the Stratford Evening Post on August 9th, 1926. It screams, "Mystery of Kitchener." The press fueled this intense, almost hysterical hype machine. You really have to put yourself in their shoes and imagine the sheer emotional weight of this. A grieving country suddenly believed, with all their hearts, that they were finally going to bring their ultimate hero home to rest. Now, what's truly fascinating and honestly a bit terrifying is exactly how Frank Powers sold this lie. He didn't just say, "Hey, I found a body." He provided incredibly specific, entirely fabricated forensic evidence to the press. He talked about the unusually tall stature of the remains, perfectly matching Kitchener. He casually mentioned an old skull scar, the exact specific condition of the teeth, and even traces of a military uniform with the right ribbons. It was a masterclass in manipulation, giving a desperate public exactly the granular details they needed to believe the unbelievable. So, part three, the coffin arrives. Frank Power announces he's placed these remains in a heavy coffin and is bringing them back to English soil. And the atmosphere in London was electric. The coffin arrived at Waterloo Station surrounded by swirling crowds. Picture this massive, heavy wooden box, supposedly holding the greatest soldier of the era, moving through the heart of London. But the authorities, well, they were a lot more suspicious than the public. They immediately whisked the coffin away for a highly secretive examination at the Lambeth Coroner's Court. Scotland Yard steps in, and they bring in the legendary forensic pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury to officially identify the remains. Okay, part four, the empty box reveal. This is the exact moment everything flips. It's August 16th, 1926. Behind closed doors at the coroner's court, the greatest forensic minds in all of Britain are standing around this heavily guarded coffin. The public is outside, holding its collective breath. The lid is pried off. The tension in that room must have been absolutely suffocating. So,
What did the famous pathologist and the detectives from Scotland Yard actually find inside?
Absolutely nothing. The Home Office releases this world-shattering official announcement. The coffin is empty. Well, actually, scratch that. It wasn't entirely empty. It was filled with weight, but it contained 0 human remains. No bones, no uniform, nothing. It was just heavy mud and tar packed tightly inside just to simulate the weight of a human body. It was a complete, utter, totally humiliating sham.
And the sheer shock of this massive deception was laid bare in print instantly all across the globe. Papers like the New York Times were just scrambling to report on the sheer absurdity of the situation. The legendary hero wasn't home at all. Some charlatan had quite literally just shipped a box of dirt across the ocean. The very next day, August 17th, headlines like this one from the Star delivered the most brutal whiplash. Coffin empty, Kitchener hoax now exposed. I mean, think about that. In less than 24 hours, the nation went from weeping tears of miraculous relief to just seething with anger at this breathtakingly cruel joke. Which leads us perfectly into part 5, the audacity of Frank Power. Because in a normal story, this is the part where the hoaxer runs away and hides in shame, right? But Frank Power was definitely not a normal hoaxer. Instead of apologizing, he doubles down with a playbook that is almost hilarious in its shamelessness. Step 1, when the empty coffin was revealed, he publicly accused the British government of sneaking into the coroner's court in the dead of night, stealing Kitchener's real body, and replacing it with mud to hide some grand secret conspiracy. Step 2, he instantly monetizes the lie, publishing a book called The Kitchener Mystery, which actually becomes a massive hit. And step 3, he even produces a documentary movie about the whole thing. The guy literally capitalized on the very outrage he caused. But part 6, the grifter's downfall. Because grifters of this magnitude, they rarely know when to call it quits. The man who fooled a nation with a box of dirt eventually let his own relentless greed catch up with him. Take a look at this guy. This is the man known as Frank Power, but Frank Power was a totally fake name. His real identity was A.V. Freeman, and he wasn't some rookie journalist trying to make a name for himself. He was a notorious professional hoaxer, already very well known in certain circles of the British press. The guy literally crafted elaborate lies for a living. Now, you're probably wondering, how on earth wasn't he immediately thrown into a dark cell for the Kitchener hoax? Well, it all came down to a truly bizarre legal loophole. You see, you can't be charged with stealing or desecrating a human corpse if the coffin you brought in never actually had a body in it in the first place. He technically just imported a heavy box of mud, so he escaped jail entirely. But his arrogance was his ultimate ruin, because years later, Freeman tried to pull off another massive scam. He tried forging the diary of the infamous serial killer Jack the Ripper. And this time, forging historical documents crossed a very clear, very prosecutable legal line, and he was finally caught and punished. And that brings us to the end of this explainer, leaving us with a truly astonishing realization about how grief, belief, and the media all intersect. A clever con artist saw a nation's gaping emotional wound and poured a box of literal dirt right into it. And for a brief, crazy moment, the whole world believed him. It really forces us to ask, if a man could so easily fool an entire grieving empire with nothing but an empty box and a confident lie, what other historical truths that we cling to today might just be mud and tar? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.